Vlad the Impaler. Even the name alone, whispered across the centuries, sends shivers down the spine. But today I want you to travel with me, back to a time when that name was not yet spoken with fear nor with awe. No, Vlad was just a boy, born into a world of conflict, betrayal, and shadows that stretched longer than the mountains of his homeland. Picture it, this idea of the mid-15th century. Europe is torn apart by war, by ambition, and by a darkness that looms from the east, the mighty Ottoman Empire, relentless in its conquest. And there, at the edge of this vast empire, was Wallachia, a small kingdom, perched precariously between the raging fires of the Ottoman Turks and the anxious gaze of Christian Europe to the west. A land of green forests, sharp mountains, and blood-soaked soil. Into this turbulent world, Vlad III was born. His father, Vlad Dracula, had sworn loyalty to the Hungarian king, and at the same time tried to appease the Ottomans. His symbol? A dragon, a fierce protector of his realm. And so, Vlad became known as the son of the dragon, or Dracula. But there's a cruel irony in that title, for his path was not one of protection, but of terror. At the tender age of just 13, Vlad was ripped from his home, sent as a hostage to the Ottoman court, along with his younger brother, Radu. Hostages, you see, were not mere pawns in this game. No, they were the flesh and blood insurance that rulers gave to their enemies. A living promise of peace or submission, imagine it. A child, sent far from his homeland to a foreign court where nothing is familiar. The language, the customs, the people, all foreign. Vlad was not a guest, not a diplomat, but a prisoner cloaked in silks, but a prisoner nonetheless. And there, under the shadow of the crescent moon, the future Impaler learned what power truly meant. The Ottomans were a mighty empire, ruthless and efficient in their conquests. Vlad, young as he was, would have seen firsthand how they ruled through fear and awe. He would have seen their methods, their brutality, and it was here and in this foreign land that a seed was planted in young Vlad's mind. A seed that would soon take root, growing into a twisted tree of revenge, cruelty, and absolute control. But let us pause for a moment and think. What does power do to a soul? Is it a weapon to wield, or does it consume the one who holds it? Vlad would spend years under Ottoman rule, watching, learning, waiting. His brother Radu embraced the Ottomans, became one of them, but Vlad's heart turned to iron. His hatred sharpened like a blade. When Vlad finally returned to his homeland, he was not the boy who had left. Not Wallachia was now a kingdom, torn apart by rivals, weakened by political intrigue, ripe for the taking. And take it, he did. Vlad seized the throne not with diplomacy, but with violence. And he would hold on to it with the only tool he trusted, fear. His enemies, his rivals, even his own people, they would learn to fear him. Because Vlad understood something primal, something ancient. Fear is the most powerful weapon of all. But now let us speak of that weapon, impalement. A word that even now stirs discomfort, doesn't it? It's not merely the act itself that strikes terror into the heart, but the slow, agonizing death it brings. Vlad didn't just kill his enemies. That would have been too simple. He wanted them to suffer, to feel the weight of their disobedience, of their betrayal. They say he would place a stake through a victim's body, careful not to pierce the vital organs, allowing them to linger for hours, sometimes even days, suspended between life and death. Imagine, if you can, an entire field of these stakes, stretching as far as the eye could see, with the groans of the dying carried on the wind. That was Vlad's message to his enemies, to those who might challenge his reign. This is the price of rebellion, the price of defiance. But oh, it wasn't only his enemies who felt his wrath. No. Vlad was a ruler who believed in control, absolute control. The stories say that he once invited the poor and the sick of his land to a grand feast. A banquet, he promised, to honor them. And they came, hungry, hopeful. But once they had eaten their fill, once they had enjoyed the wine and the laughter, he locked the doors and set the hall ablaze. A gift, he said, to rid them of their suffering. Mercy, in his eyes, took a shape darker than death itself. This was the Vlad who ruled Wallachia, a prince, yes, but a prince shaped by violence, and who in turn shaped his kingdom with terror. Yet, was it madness, or was it strategy? Vlad faced threats from every side. The Ottomans, the Hungarians, even his own people who schemed against him. In his mind, fear was his armor, his shield, his fortress. And in that time, in that world, perhaps it was. But let us step back and ask ourselves, what happens to a man who lives in a world of nightmares? Does he become the very thing he fears? Vlad's story is not just one of cruelty or power. It is a story of survival. In a world where survival came at the cost of one's humanity. And now, centuries later, his name lives on, not as Vlad, the Prince of Wallachia, but as Dracula, the vampire, the immortal creature of the night. But why? Why has his story, this brutal ruler from a forgotten corner of Europe, become the stuff of legend? That, my friends, that is the question we must ask ourselves. Is it because we fear what he became, or because deep down we recognize something of ourselves in him? That dark, primal part of us that seeks power, control, survival, at any cost. Are the winds of time, how they shape legends, twisting the truth like vines around an ancient tree, until what was once clear becomes lost in shadow. Vlad the Impaler, Dracula. Two names bound together yet separated by the gulf between history and myth. But now, as we journey further into this tale, we must peel back the layers and uncover what lies beneath the surface of this infamous figure. Was Vlad truly the monster that history, or perhaps our imaginations, have made him out to be? Or was he something more? Something misunderstood? Let me take you back to the heart of Wallachia once more. The land, rugged and wild, where the mountains seemed to grow from the earth like the teeth of some great beast. Here, amidst this raw beauty, Vlad's reign began to crumble. You see, power, no matter how strong, no matter how terrifying, cannot last forever. Enemies close in, allies turn cold, and even the most feared rulers are but mortal men. The Ottomans, relentless in their expansion, wanted Vlad to bend the knee, but he refused. Oh, he refused. He would not bow to the Sultan. Instead, Vlad waged a guerrilla war, using the land itself as his weapon. The forests of Wallachia became his fortress. His soldiers moved like shadows, striking in the dead of night, disappearing before the dawn. And with each victory, his legend grew. A prince who defied an empire, a leader who would stop at nothing to protect his people, to preserve his reign. But for every act of defiance there was a cost. Vlad's cruelty, his thirst for control, had left him isolated. Even his own nobles, the boyars, plotted against him. They whispered in the dark corners of the court, scheming to overthrow the very man who had once fought for their land. Betrayal was the currency of power, and Vlad knew this. He trusted no one. In the end, the very fear that had kept him in power became his undoing. So to betrayal, it's an old story, isn't it? The hero betrayed by those closest to him. And so it was for Vlad. Captured by the Hungarians, imprisoned, humiliated, his throne stolen, his legacy in ruins. Imagine it. A man who once struck terror into the hearts of nations, now a prisoner, his name spoken in whispers, no longer out of fear but out of curiosity, or perhaps even pity. But even in chains, Vlad's legend grew. You see, there is something about darkness, something about cruelty that captivates us, that draws us in. His tales of impalements, of terror, they spread like wildfire across Europe. They reached the ears of kings, of peasants, of scholars, and in these stories the seed of Dracula was planted. Vlad would eventually return to power, but his second reign was short-lived. His enemies, relentless, struck him down. And there, on the battlefield, the Impaler met his end. They say his body was cut to pieces, his head sent to the Sultan as proof of his death. But even death could not silence the legend. No, it was only the beginning. Now let us fast forward. Centuries passed, and Vlad's story, like a dark wine aged in the cellars of history, growing richer, more complex with each retelling. And then, in the 19th century, an Irishman named Bram Stoker reached into the depths of that history and pulled forth a figure that would change the world forever. Dracula, a creature of the night, immortal, terrifying, seductive, but not born from the imagination of Stoker alone. No. Stoker had found inspiration in the tales of Vlad the Impaler, the real Dracula, the man who drank the blood of his enemies, the prince who ruled with fear, who impaled thousands, leaving their bodies to rot on the stakes like offerings to the gods of death. But Stoker's Dracula, he was different. This Dracula was not bound by mortality. He was eternal, a creature cursed to walk the earth forever, feeding on the blood of the living to sustain his cursed existence. And so, the myth became something more than the man. Dracula the vampire became a symbol of our fears, our desires, our fascination with the unknown, with death, with power, with immortality. And yet, beneath it all, if you look closely, you can still see Vlad, the real Vlad, the Prince of Wallachia. A man, not a monster. A man who lived in a world of chaos, who wielded cruelty as a weapon to survive. A man who, like all of us, was shaped by the forces around him. Forces of violence, of fear, of desperation. So, my friends, what's the truth? Is Vlad the Impaler a monster, or is he a reflection of the world in which he lived? A world where survival came at a terrible cost. A world where power was bought with blood. And what of Dracula, the vampire? Is he merely a creation of fiction, or is he too a reflection of something deeper, something that lies within us all? Our desire for control, for eternal life, for the power to shape our destiny, no matter the cost. These are the questions we must ask ourselves, because history is not just the story of kings and battles. No, it is the story of us, of what it means to be human, to live, to fight, to fear, and to survive. So as we look back on Vlad the Impaler, let us not see him only as the monster that legends have made him. Let us see him as a man who lived in a dark and violent time, a man who did what he thought was necessary to protect his land, his people, his throne. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the greatest tragedy of all. Thank you for walking with me through the shadows of the past.